Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Our topic today is Nanoeconomics and the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering at Albany. Our guest is Dr. Edward Cupoli, head of the Nanoeconomic Department, or Constellation as it's now called. We're going to be looking at the college effects on the companies here, the government, academia, and the region in general. Let's get started. First, thank you for being on the show, Doctor.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Your background is interesting as I was looking on the web, and I wanted to hear a little more about it.
Well, you mean in terms of how I came to the college?
How you came,
yeah.
What you did in state government, things like that.
Right. I went to state government. I'm from Syracuse. When I started, I left the university. I did research for 4 years. I went to Michigan State to teach because one of my professors said, once an academic, always an academic. It wasn't the same as research. I came back this way. I had job offers in Albany, went to work in the legislature. I was the only economist. I was the only person that did not have legislation responsibilities. It wasn't much after that that a couple people left and my boss had asked me to forecast because that was my dissertation. There were no formal forecasting models in the legislature at that time. I developed a forecasting unit over time.
And how did that work? What did that do? What did you forecast?
Well, you need to forecast the economy first to forecast revenues because, annually how much money do we have has always been the big question.
Yep,
Probably always will be. So it was to do both in the legislature, unlike an academic unit, they needed an answer every year at budget time.
Right.
So we didn't have a lot of people. In the beginning was me, and we worked with the tax staff because they knew more about the taxes than I did. I provided technical support. But we started to publish our forecast in 1986, which is really a very good thing. When I left the legislature only 2.5 years ago, we had 6 PhD economists in the forecasting unit.
Wow, that's some growth.
Yeah, which would, if it were in the private sector or any place else, would be a very large group of people. Others just hire consultants, but consultants only give you a result. They don't give you the ability to analyze other things or keep on top of whatever you'd want to know about. For example, we put out regional economic reports that were helpful to the members to understand what's happening in different regions of the state.
So you really became an integral part of the process of the budget and...
Right. As a backroom type of person, right?
Right.
Yeah. But fundamentally, it supported the basic concepts within the budget, but also in terms of economic development activity and other things. So I did that.
And we should say you have a PhD in economics.
PhD in economics from Syracuse University, yes. Born and raised in Syracuse, New York, so upstate person. And another interesting thing that doesn't show is that my first job offer after I came here in 1982 was 1985 from a Wall Street firm.
Sounds like money.
And I didn't realize how weird I was until years later. But I turned down a job offer for $150,000.
Wow. And this
I was making in 1985.
Okay, that was
a lot of money.
3 or 4.
And I was making, I think, low 30s.
Wow.
But it was extremely interesting because the person knew that I was having too much fun. I enjoyed it, even though I worked a lot. I enjoyed it because I felt like I was making a difference, and I think a lot of it was my mother telling me when I first started there that my grandfather would have been proud of me because I was working for the government.
Interesting.
And when I asked her why, she said, well, because to serve the government is an honor. So I always took it that way. And I never was really looking to leave the government as long as I could contribute. So I had job offers from Wall Street. And it wasn't until, beginning of 2004 that I got a call from the South, from Georgia, from an old professor that said the governor's looking for a person that does revenue forecasting. And I said, geez, I really can't do that. I could do that, but that's not what I really like to spend my career doing. So fundamentally, we had conversations over the next 4, 5, 6 months, and created a position that would have been responsible, unlike New York, for directly giving a number to the joint session of the legislature, and that would have bound the agreements in the legislature. And at the same time would have been a joint appointment with the university at Georgia State University, which was a great thing. But I was on my way there for my first interview, and I got a phone call to take a visit to the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering.
There it is.
And there it is. And when I did that, and I saw well, I don't know if anybody can see the vision of Dr. Calieros. He's a very complex man. But he laid it out, and then the thought was, wow, this is the greatest potential of anything I've ever seen since I've been studying the state economy, which goes back to the mid-1974, 1975, when I started doing research on it. The greatest potential to change things of anything that I could see.
And I think anybody who ever had doubts about anything, and everybody should have doubts about everything.
Right.
But when you see $4 billion put into something, there's somebody who really has an idea that this could be something.
Right. Oh, most definitely. And people, in the beginning, I was as skeptical as everybody else. And so it's only with time, when you talk to other people, when you get a sense from people that don't have a vested interest in it,
right,
that becomes important. And I've gotten more and more of that over time. And then when the Semitech announcement, for example, the next day, went to the office, I had a message from a friend who comes out of Wall Street, and he said, "Congratulations." What's he congratulating me about? He's 12:56 a.m. I don't know where he's calling from in the world. So I sent him an email, and then he called me. And he said, "Don't you know?" I said, "What?" He goes, "Well, Semitech." "But how do you know about the Semitech deal? You're not in Albany. You don't read the Albany papers." He goes, "I got a phone call from Taiwan." And they said, "This is a big deal." So they weren't concerned about the local aspect as much as how important it was in terms of the industry.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, now that brings us up to what we've always talked about as nanotechnology.
Right.
But now we're hearing words like nanoscale, College of Nanoscale.
Right.
What part of the college is that? We know where it is. It's really high-tech and cool on that corner, but how does that fit in with the college?
Well, nanoscale science and engineering, the basis of it is as we move down to the nano, so a billionth of a meter, but atom by atom, as we move down to that, to prepare the workforce of, we say, the 21st century, obviously we're already in the 21st century, of the next 2 to 3 decades, we're going to have to teach. We believe that the concept of the college is to train, to teach in a different way.
A different way.
In a different way. Well, not teach in a different way, but a different curriculum.
Right.
That the scientists and engineers in the future, and of course we're very obviously applied school, right? I mean, the place, we'll talk, I'm sure, about it later.
Well, we can develop that,
but is a very applied school. So it's not a theoretical school. There are theoretical courses, obviously, in the take, but it's not a theoretical school in terms of just doing the science for science sake. The concept of the school is to help to advance economic development, economic activity. So to bring the sciences together so that there's a smattering of, and maybe smattering is a bad word, but I'm an economist and not a scientist, but the core areas of each of the sciences, the physics, the chemistry, the biology, etc.
Okay.
Right? And then the student will go down the path of what they want to concentrate in. But they will have a broader base of the theory across all sciences. So they'll be able to better understand when things come closer together. Because in nanotechnology, some of the basic properties are changed. It's not that we haven't observed nanotechnology before. You can sit by a fire with the wood and there's nanoparticles.
Right.
But that's not us making them.
Right.
We're going to move to a world where we make them, and which will be much different.
That's really exciting. When I think about some of the things that I think I learned back in philosophy class, and I had this philosophy class and we read different people. It was the philosophy of perception, so it actually did involve some science. And we would read something from a chemist and something from a physicist and something from somebody who studied anatomy. And everyone had a different worldview. I couldn't help but come to the conclusion that they were looking at a different world, and of course they have different conclusions. So when you talk about pulling the core together, to me it gives me goosebumps, and I think in a way that cuts across some of the real silo type problems that we've had
Right.
in science.
Right, exactly. And I think the important thing about it for us, in terms of, remember, my reason for staying in upstate was the opportunity.
Well, having a good time doing what you were doing.
Yeah, right, right, exactly. To help create more jobs. And my concern is not the capital region per se, but the upstate economy. I believe that this has the potential to change the upstate economy because there'll be other spin-offs along the way. You know, not spin-offs a day or 2 days, or, you know, but it takes time, but that potential, and it's fundamentally around, when you're talking about the college, it's fundamentally around, we have great universities, but we don't have a lot of jobs around us.
Right.
The center is attracted a lot of jobs, insourced, and now it's creating the atmosphere of more educated people that are specifically useful to that industry, right? So if you put together this kind of like ecosystem of the companies and their needs with more educated people that can fill the needs to get to a critical mass, and a lot of people say that there's a critical mass already. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on what critical mass means, but I've heard that.
You mean here, that
Here,
we really have
here.
quite a...
When you get to the point of having a critical mass, then it says that other companies will come. And what's interesting from, you know, again, as an economist, you know, some people, when they talk about where the companies locate, and everybody, you know, it's low cost, low whatever. There was a case of a company that was going to locate either someplace in upstate New York or someplace in the South. I won't mention the place in upstate. I think it was in the papers, but upstate city and Research Triangle.
Okay.
And some colleagues did some analysis, and strangely enough, there were pluses and minuses in both. The company located where? Outside of Boston,
So,
where wages were higher,
uh-huh.
where house prices were higher, where congestion was higher, right? But what's also higher?
Education?
Education. And the workforce that potentially could satisfy
To
that.
drive that thing.
So what it is companies want to have a place where there are people there that can do the work. So as the cluster grows here and more people are educated, we started the college only a couple of years ago, but as that grows, then there's a greater probability of more companies being attracted by the activity and by the sciences. Because
Now, I just want to refresh myself of the kind of the scope of the number of people that are working there, and then the number of students who are enrolled in school.
Sure.
How is that?
Yeah, right. In terms of the number of students, it changes, I mean, all the time. If I checked on that before I came, I think it's somewhere about around 120.
Okay.
Now, for a college, it was created in 2004. That's a pretty big number already. And my understanding is we've admitted already 30 for the next year.
That's a lot for a
Right.
year.
Right, it's a lot for a year. This is a graduate program only. So when a lot of your viewers might think about it, well, that doesn't sound like a lot of students, but that means most of them are, not most of them, all of them are doing research.
This is not Psychology 101.
No, there's no teaching assistantships or anything like that. There are they do research.
Right.
They come there, they do their coursework, but they do a lot of research. That's how they grow. The unique relationship with their professors and the research so that they move on and get their master's degree or their doctorate. And it takes several years. An economist, typically, it's 3 or 4 years. Maybe it's longer, but there it's 5, 6, 7 years. So there's a lot more work involved in that process. In terms of people that work there, that's a really good question. I think our numbers that, you know, if you read the press releases, I don't know what it is, I think it was 800 when you read that one from last year. My understanding is it's somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000.
I think I've seen that number.
Yeah. And, excuse me, I apologize, I have a cold. But what's interesting is I've talked to the Labor Department, and I'm going to get together with them and see if we can pull together something that looks at it more finitely, because where we are is not typical university space. If you were to come through on a tour, and sometime if you'd like to, you know, visit us.
I would
come
like
through
to. I did watch the 3 videos, and people can do that. There are 3 videos on your website, but
Right.
I'm sure it doesn't do it justice anymore.
No, no. They're good if you don't have the opportunity to come and visit. But a lot of people do visit.
Right.
A lot of your viewers, the kids might have come, you know, a Nano Career Day or some other event where they come through. Others, maybe of the old people, the viewers, with some association they're a part of or whatever. But when you go through there and you see something like, I guess the number now is $4.2 billion in assets.
Those are numbers that are hard to understand.
Hard to understand. Well, I can give you what that means. I remember in my last job at the legislature, they had asked me some questions about particular activity of what they want to do in Syracuse. And Syracuse is my hometown. I wrote my dissertation about Syracuse, you know, so I know it pretty intimately. And I looked up in a comptroller's report what the value of all taxable property was in Syracuse. This was a few years ago. I think it was and I don't quote me, but I think it was like 3.3 or 3.4 billion dollars.
So less than the value that's been put into that corner.
Right. Now the difference is, and I don't want to scare anybody, you got to think about it, but that real estate's going to be there. It'll depreciate a little bit or appreciate a little bit every year. In nanotechnology, with corporations, especially the work in the semiconductor industry, they're there because they need to come together. And what does that mean? They have to come together. Well, in the old days, when they made things at a much higher scale of you know, well, I guess technically they say microns.
Out of bigger parts?
Out of bigger parts, or bigger sizes.
Right.
Or if the chart that I was telling you about, transistors. Can we talk about that for a second?
Absolutely.
But in 1968, the price of a transistor was $1.
And I probably had a little radio.
Right, and there's like 8 or 10 transistors in the radio. Now, you know, a transistor, well, let's figure out what a transistor costs. You could get millions of transistors for $1.
That's impossible to get my mind around.
Me too. But I think about how could we have, you know, the devices, right, that you could put up and you could talk to and you could do your emails and, you know, all the newer things that are coming out. But as you go down that path, in an industry that is productivity annually about 30%. Now, if we have 3% productivity,
you said 30%.
30%. So if you how else do you go from 1 to 10 million in 40 years?
It's just shocking when you think of most of our productivity numbers are around 3% if we're doing well.
If you're doing very well, it's 3%.
Yeah.
Right. So the semiconductor industry is a major driver of productivity. Some say it is the major driver of productivity. And it's a major driver of overall economic growth in the economy. And I would make the argument that the federal government should take a bigger role in it than the state government. And we're very fortunate, I think, in New York that there was had some bold leadership in making this investment. You know, several hundreds of millions of dollars of that $4 billion is the state, but clearly it's a lot less than a quarter of it is state.
Now, maybe a naive question, but I would ask maybe, okay, if that's true and it makes perfectly good sense that money, no matter where it came from, would be helpful if it's used in the right way. But if New York is putting the money in, then New York should be getting more benefits.
Definitely. Well, the jobs, the insourcing. So there are people that I work with that come from Texas, that come from Louisiana, that come from California, Washington, Vermont, all different places. And the other part that's interesting, in the beginning, so in 2005 when I started, people would say, well, you know, it's Albany. You don't hear that anymore.
That's great.
Because now it's reached, in that respect, a critical mass of people wanting to come.
So it's changed what it's about.
It changed what it's about. Now, that it takes time. I mean, I remember last year, you know, I was talking to a friend and he was talking about how his grandson was going to go to MIT. Of course, you know, you got to feel proud for the grandfather.
Of course.
It hurt me because I'm thinking, well, what about CNSC?
Us? Yeah.
But CNSC hasn't been around a long time. And what we see is that, you know, now we get more students, locally, regionally, U.S. students that want to come. I mean, it's about 40 to 50% of the students are domestic students.
From the U.S.?
From the U.S.
Only 40 or 50?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, but early on, you know, who's most interested in getting a unique education, right? It's not typical American student.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, right? But there are a lot. My nephew, in fact, I should tell you, my nephew is a bona fide, I always think of him as a bona fide genius. He wanted to come here undergraduate. And I said, come on, I stayed closer to home in Philadelphia. But graduate school, he's excited. Here's a kid I've never seen get excited about, you know.
Wow.
But he was here a few weeks ago. He's
Could be contagious.
already got an apartment, already has a car, already all these things.
Wow.
He just wants to do things. He said, well, you have to wait till, you know, school starts, you know. But extremely interested because fundamentally when he came last year he wanted to visit a professor. So we set it up. That was easy enough to do one of your colleagues. So when he was done, he called me and I walked him back and I said, what do you think? He goes, wow. Wow, what? He goes, wow. He goes, that professor just told me something that contradicted what my professor has been telling me for 2 years, right? And he was really impressed. And he studied it. He's a thinker. So that's great.
Must
when
have
you're
clicked.
surrounded by the types of professors, it's a non-traditional type of place. A lot of the professors, you know, obviously traditional academic, but there are also a lot of professors that came out of corporations like IBM. I mean, that's like, what? You know, people actually did the work. Or, you know, Tokyo Electron, or we have Roman Haas, a chemical company. So they come from the experiences. They want to be in the university because they have more freedom to delve into things and stay with it longer. Where in corporations, you might start down a path and they decide to move on.
Right.
Right? Academics can pursue it a little bit longer. And companies like to be around the academics because it's relatively cheap labor and they're tapping their brain power continually.
So this place is a shining light here.
Well, I hope so. I mean, you know, I've decided to make it a part of my career, and I don't move that often. I was in the legislature, you know, 23 years, so yeah.
Let's fill out a little more of the economics part. I know we want to look as much as we can at the region and how we might be able to think about the growth and the effect of the nanotechnology. But before we do that, let's just say, now, nanoeconomics. I did a Google search and I came up with some silly definitions. What is it really?
Well, we're defining it. Nanoeconomics is this, fundamentally, as we've moved down this path of Moore's Law, or how the transistors got from $1 for one to millions for one. You know, you double the number of transistors on a
Every
chip
how many years or so?
every year and a half,
Oh.
so 18 months on average. So what's happened is the devices, so they have to get smaller and smaller, not only this way, but that way at the same time. As that's happened, it's become more and more difficult. So it'd be like in the old days. I mean, how far back do you want to go? Somebody made everything. You made your own clothes.
Right.
You built your own houses. And then we advanced, right? And somebody, you know, it was division and specialization of labor. Well, that's happened in this particular industry. That companies...
Oh, even by company.
Even by company. Companies evolved. I mean, there's so many dimensions as it gets down. Think about how do you put wires together when you have 500 million to 1 billion devices on something that's a little piece of a corner of this.
I think that's something that everybody who isn't working in your shop or isn't a physicist in your area wonders about.
Right? And so as they get smaller and smaller and smaller, I mean, silly things. I don't think they're silly, but now I understand them. Lines.
Right.
How do you make a line so that it's straighter? Well, you know, if we're making it this size, not a problem. But if we want to make something 50 nanometers, what's 50 nanometers? Well, I know that my colleagues say you shouldn't say this, but if you take the thickness of your hair, not the length, but the thickness, roughly 100,000 nanometers.
So it's got to be thinner
So
than
if it's
that.
going to be 50 or 100, if it's going to be 100, the line, you have to have, so
It's
that
like-
means you could put 1,000 of those lines on the hair. So that gets smaller, and so as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so you have to have the ability to do that in lithography, for
I can
example.
see why you're
So-
excited.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot. So, you know, patterning of, make it out of patterns. The chip is designed, but then they make the chip with patterns. Lithography, they shine, well, I guess, I'll get through all the details, but
Right.
they'll use lithography, chemicals, chemical properties.
They
And
do
so
it
as they
with
do
machines,
that and they
yeah.
make it smaller and smaller, then there's more and more like, how do we get this done? So what evolved over the years is a roadmap in the industry, the semiconductor industry, where everyone gets together and they decide this is, okay, what we think is achievable year by year for the next 15 years, and which are the critical things that we may not be able to accomplish. So a lot of that has been taken care of with Semitech that was created in the late 1980s. Hopefully we understand they're going to be moving to Albany, you know, in the not too distant future.
Right.
but fundamentally to work on collaborations that the chip companies put together of what those are. So lithography is one of the big pieces.
So as you're going through, I don't want to lose your
Right.
train of thought, but we're not talking about money economics. We're talking about an economic system
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, money isn't
of people working together and trading, and,
Oh, it's hard,
and
yeah.
everything is counting.
right,
there.
but it's all related to that. But think about it this way: if it costs you a higher and higher percentage of your income to stay alive, and you can share it with somebody else, you probably would, right?
Right.
And on this trajectory of Moore's Law doubling every 18 months, the companies want to be able to come together, and otherwise they wouldn't share at all, right?
Wouldn't make sense.
A big part that I didn't mention, R&D, research and development. We're talking double digit, whether it's 10, 15, 18%, depends on the company at point in time in this industry. Most companies in most industries are single digit, low single digit
Of their
of
revenue.
their sales that go towards R&D.
Right.
They have to turn a lot more money. So every 18 months, if you're going to go to a smaller device, you have to spend a lot of money to do that, right? Which is atypical.
Which
That's
means
how-
your returns have to grow as well.
Yes, exactly. So it's a large industry with a lot of profitability, with a lot of highly paid talent that has a roadmap. And what we're trying to do, I think we are doing it. I'm just a small part of it. But what we're doing is we're attracting more and more companies, and we're training labor to build the ecosystem that helps us fundamentally to grow this economy.
Always wondering, what's the effect? Are the property values going to go up? Are the roads too narrow? Do we need more water? All of these things that are important. But it seems like what you're saying, things are maybe growing a little slower than what some of the people feared. Maybe it's not Austin. Maybe it's not going to double in 5 or 10 years. But it could be continuous.
Well, I don't know how this grows. There'll be a growth spurt at some point.
Okay.
I mean, now it's still basically the basic parts of R&D without the spin-offs that we would think would happen over time. I think a big part of it is going to be attracting venture capitalists or venture capitalists that want to stay
Could
here.
the rate of growth grow?
Yeah, I think the rate of growth will grow.
So at some point, we're going to start noticing it, and then
Yeah, I think some of those charts that I showed you. I mean, the rate of growth in this region has been stronger than it has in the rest of upstate, for sure. And even compared to downstate in the earlier part, like 2001 to 2005, in terms of house price appreciation, everyone's experienced that, but it's growing a lot faster in Albany than in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica. So there's something that's different that's going on in the corridor from New York City up through
and
Saratoga.
as you said, it's not government.
It's not government. Yeah, we talked earlier. It's not government because our area, this region, actually did worse in government. It declined a little bit compared to the rest of
That
the
would cause
state.
inertia, if anything. It just
Right. So there's a lot more of the change has been, and it's not a huge shift, but just shifting towards a greater shifting towards the private sector, where the generation of the income comes from that provides the good library services that we're in the building of, right, and help society. And it's about creating fundamentally high value-added jobs, because the multiplier is much greater for the high value-added job than the typical job.
Right.
So to get us back to that era where most of us were brought up in, where people can have a job and they can raise their family and so on.
And if this is successful, then our global trade issue will be much resolved, because we're trying to sell. These are not things we're going to be just using here. It's not that we're building houses. You're
Yeah.
building something that's going to be shared and traded around the world.
Definitely, most definitely.
So that's pretty neat.
Yep.
We're almost out of time. It's amazing.
Yes.
I think we could go on easily for a half hour, but I don't want to stop without kind of wrapping up a little bit and asking you a couple questions about what do you think the college would like to see happen in government, in terms of education? Where is more support needed? What are we doing well? What are we not doing as well?
Wow, that's a tough question.
It's a big question, I know.
I'm just an economist. Well, I think the college, from what I've seen, is on a great track. We grow our professors at a fairly fast rate for a small college, so it's The students, great students.
Should we have more science in the schools?
Oh, definitely. We need more to stimulate younger kids as they get older to stay interested in the sciences. And I was a math major and an economist, not a science major, but, you know.
Well, some people would say math is science.
Math is science. It is science. Economics actually is more scientific than I would have thought of now that I'm hanging out with the scientists.
Especially yours. Yours was
Yeah.
econometrics, which
Yes,
most
yeah.
people can't pronounce, and it's
Right.
difficult to do.
Right. But I think that we need to stimulate more younger people to be interested and involved, because so many more things will be done that way. But if we can, my thought is we should just stimulate younger people to think about whatever. If they want to be in the arts or education or government or whatever, just help to stimulate that thought process. Because the one thing is for sure, it's going to change, right?
Right.
The only constant is change. The only variable is the rate of change. The world is changing at a fast rate. And we can't predict 20, 30 years. I mean, companies sometimes can't predict 6 months to a year out, right? The nanotechnology is going to get more and more sophisticated over time. But it'll affect people in other ways, besides what they can buy, like more stuff for less money, right?
Right.
Like these things.
Right.
So we need, because there'll be other job opportunities. So the more that we have younger people that can think, not necessarily get PhDs in science, that would be great if we can get more of them, because that's important for our nation's growth,
Right.
right, to compete in the world. But also important for society as a whole to be trained more to think. And if we could do that, I think we will basically help to improve the economy.
I don't
and
see
the
how we
country.
can go any further than that thought. We need to do that and
Yes.
not talk anymore. That
Sure.
that sounds like something we should work on.
Yep.
I hope we'll have you back, because this went way too fast.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed the show. I want to invite you to tune in for the next show, and hope you have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.